This is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MtG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptar. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MtG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
All right, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal cast, post Mono Arena Meta Edition number whatever this is. So speaking of Mono Arena and how things are shifting away from digital, or shifting towards digital, away from paper, that's kind of our topic this week. How we handle spoiler season. We're going to take two different viewpoints here on how we're handling it, a more traditional, and then how you handle it when you know there are going to be supply issues going forward. Wizards released that announcement where they said, hey, there's delays in products. We know that there's some delay in the amount of product getting out, and that is going to affect pretty much the entire year of sets. Yes. So basically just as vendors, personally, whatever, how we handle spoilers.
Yep. So for me, I've been taking a fairly lax approach to it. I haven't been hawking spoilers as rigorously as I usually have, but that's because I've been able to kind of change my methods. And one of the biggest things I did was actually cull my sphere of influence to basically just two big pieces or big pillars, and the first one is like WotC level pros and high level Star City Games competitors, and high level Eternal format players or specialists. And that's given me a much better look into what's going on in given formats. The WotC level and Star City competitors, those high level pro players, are able to take care of the standard format essentially, or anything that's being pushed by either one of those entities, and I can wait a little bit on moving in on any kind of spec until they've kind of really fleshed things out. They're the people that I trust to do the legwork and say, these are the cards that are at rate, these are the cards that are above rate, this is going to change the meta now, and this is going to be something we're going to look at in the meta in September after rotation. And that's been huge. Before it was just kind of like a deluge of everything, and I had to do the legwork. And I got lucky a few times, most notably pre-orders for humans in Shadows over Innistrad, wherever Thalia's lieutenant was. I basically pre-ordered all the good humans and immediately sold them back to that same vendor for like an easy trip. Yeah. But that was pure luck. I trusting these people is much better. And on top of that, but to a lesser degree, a handful of dedicated personalities. So that would be something like Saffron Olive or Frank Karsten, where these people have their own dedicated brand and niche for what they do. And they're going to go deeper on tech that might go unnoticed at the beginning. And they might take what seems to be seemingly unplayable cards and trophy them or take them on a decent winning streak in Arena. Frank Carson, not so much, but he's the kind of person that I think still does for Channel Fireball the, like, here are the top 5 combos in Standard that involve 8 cards. Yeah. That kind of stuff.
It's interesting you mentioned Saffron Olive, because he even, as spoilers were coming out for Jumpstart, there were a couple that he said, this may be in Against the Odds, or in Core 21, this is like a potential against the odds card. Yep. So it's, worth noting that you mentioned paying attention to him, and he'll even tell you ahead of time, like, I'm calling my shot on this card.
Yes.
And the card typically doesn't react until it's on stream. So you have a little bit of leeway there, and that's worth paying attention to that type of personality for that reason.
Yeah, he's also been soliciting decks from the public, too, to look for some crazy, interesting things to play and just have a good time with, and even from there, like, that's what I mean. He has that brand, that niche that he's working within, and by including him in the sphere of influence that I have, it gives me insight into, what's going on. And at another point, I'll make later into something that I've done. It's just kind of fantastically lined up well with the pandemic. That I got this all done ahead of time, and so I've been much more open to that. Yeah. So it just pure happenstance that this worked out well for me. I'm able to pay a little more attention during the day now that I'm not at work. There's not like in the office. There's not
Yeah.
a ton of shoulder tapping. I can pull up TweetDeck on one monitor and just look at hashtags float by and things like that. But
Yeah.
that initial culling was huge.
It's for me, it's similar. I have the sphere of influence and like people that I pay attention to, and one of them is like the CEDH guys. And then, honestly, it's awful and it's drumming through a cesspool. But our EDH, that subreddit, is full of information, and it's just the task of getting through the chaff and getting to what's real.
Yeah.
And then, honestly, vendors are another one. What cards do they see that they're like, all right, well, I'm selling a ton of this card on pre-order. All right, great. So that's a card I'm going to target the Friday of release when it's a race to the bottom on TCG Player. When Aether Revolt came out, I got disallows for $1 a piece, and they were $10 by the end of the weekend. So it's basically about paying attention to that. And one of the reasons, EDH is important is obviously casuals drive the market.
Yep.
And as both of us have harped on for the past few episodes, it's pretty much the only format that seems to be quarantine proof, because people are still playing on webcams on the Play EDH Discord and everything else. So there's still an active paper scene for that, despite the fact that there's no paper Magic.
Yes.
And so, one thing I always target is red enchantments with too much text. Sarkhan's Unsealing, your day will come.
There's that triple damage one now in Jumpstart, right?
Yep. Just stuff like that you can kind of see the signs ahead of time, and they're like, all right, well, this is spoiled. And the nice thing about EDH is once a card's spoiled, a lot of times play groups are okay with you playing with it, as long as you intend to buy the card. So you can actually get some testing information from the Play EDH Discord, from Play EDH, or EDH Rec, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I've called mine more towards, is trying to, at least especially like now, when that scene is actively thriving, trying to pay attention to those personalities in that metagame for like, all right, well, what am I going to target from Jumpstart, from Core 21?
Yep.
And that's,
Yeah, I think there's an interesting digression here where Core 21 and Jumpstart, we know so there will be supply chain issues for this.
Yeah.
So, and even C20. Because we haven't received, some places, I think I heard that Canada received the second wave yet. To the best of my knowledge, US has not received, or maybe not everybody has received second wave yet. So if you're looking to pick up cards early versus spec, this is something that you need to take into account when you're looking at these products. What's going to be shortchanged, in essence, for weeks or months as there are supply chain issues? What will hold a false price because of that? And is it better to move into singles or sealed based on entertainment value of the product, longevity of the product in terms of sales? Because WotC has not said how long Jumpstart will be on shelves, whether it's going to be mystery booster style or not, and then actual prices of cards contained within based on assumed rarity EV.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be one of the talking points for the whole year, is what's happening supply-wise, because we did have months of what should have been active production on Ikoria, on Core 21, and based on the release schedule, because we get Core 21, and then 3 weeks later it's Jumpstart.
Yeah.
So presumably it affected Jumpstart as well.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a talking point for a while.
Yeah, we don't know if the printers they use have gone back into production.
Yeah.
Right? So I assume we're not going to be quote-unquote dry after the fall or going into the fall, but it might just be limited release over time. It's a constant theme, and this isn't something that I've really taken into consideration when looking at cards to pick up, or either for spec purposes or play purposes. I kind of created this barrier around it. I've insulated that idea because this is the paradigm we're in now. It might not be the paradigm we will be in 2021. And as it goes, I don't sit on sealed. And the specking that I do is generally pretty light, like large quantity, low price stuff. So I'm not too worried about supply chain. It does allow me to churn some of those cards a lot faster because there's, the supply just isn't there. But it hasn't really affected me that much.
Yeah.
So, one of the other big things that I've had to really actually start doing with Jumpstart, less core 2021, is just to become more open-minded when it comes to fresh eyes on cards. So the card Emil the Blessed was spoiled in Jumpstart. It is in the Unicorn deck. And you basically can pay 3 to exile another creature you control, return it to its to the battlefield, or whenever a creature enters, you can pay a hybrid green-white. And if you do, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Well, the card Workhorse has been a card since Exodus, so 96 or something like that. And this is a card that has rocketed up in value. It was an absolute chaff rare. It got fresh eyes. So people thought, well, are you going to buy into horses? This has been, or unicorns, what have you. This is an eroded horse. It can make, quote unquote, infinite mana with Emil. But the problem is, this has been a card that makes infinite mana for over 8 years.
Yeah.
And when Emil was spoiled, and I first found out that people were going to combo this thing, and it just rocketed up, I thought, why? Micaeus the Unhallowed has text on it. This is when a creature you control, or non-human creature you control, without undying dies. It comes back with a +1/+1 counter. Just a 2-card infinite mana combo for colorless in mono black. You can combo Workhorse any number of ways. And because I was very narrow-minded, it's just like, it passed by me. I didn't understand it. I still don't agree with it, but I just have to be a little more open to casual market drivers. And another good example, and I think this one's to me a lot better, is in Jumpstart in the Mill deck, because obviously there's going to be something dumb in Mill. Bruvac, the Grandiloquent. If an opponent would mill 1 or more cards, they mill twice that many cards instead. And I read this card and I set it aside because I thought it was weird with the way it would work, and a lot of people were waiting on Eli Schifflin to get back to them, i.e., the Rules Codex. They asked, if you cast the card Traumatize with this in play, does it work the way we expect it to, and your opponent mills out their library? And Eli replied, yes, it will mill out the entire library, but based on the way the math works, if there's an odd number, they'll be left with 1 card. If it's even, it's all gone.
It's the whole thing.
It's the whole thing, right? So Traumatize has been in a bunch of sets, and it's been in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 core sets, and the original printing was Odyssey.
Onslaught?
Odyssey,
Close.
The block right before, right?
Yeah.
I know what one you're thinking. You're thinking of the black one. That was in Onslaught. But instead of Traumatize really popping, what popped instead is Fleet Swallower. A rare from Ixalan that does the exact same thing as Traumatize.
But it's a dude.
Yeah, it costs 7, it's a 6/6, and it's a fish. They'll go together. They will go in the same EDH deck 100%. And I get this, and I understand it, and I like this more than Workhorse. I like Bruvac pumping up big, grandiose spells like this, and being more open-minded about Workhorse is something I just need to do on the whole. So, the change in attitude also came with the spoiler season.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, especially as vendors, it's really important to constantly reevaluate, because as the game evolves, 10 years ago, EDH was fine, but it wasn't nearly the financial driver that it is today. Mm-hmm. And it's important that you are amenable to recognizing those changes and to saying, I get it. This is something that is foreign to me, but it makes sense in the context.
Yes.
So I'll acknowledge that it exists.
Yep.
And it used to be, kitchen table players were kind of the financial driver in that, they would buy your bulk. But back in the days of the early Star City circuit, everyone was playing competitive, and that was where the money was. Mm-hmm. And this is a prime example of how that's changed over time, and that it's important to constantly reevaluate what you assume is going to be correct in the meta.
Yeah, I think it also comes, speaking of the vendor perspective, it's also important to understand that when you're looking at something like this and I sit down and now I know Workhorse has a value and I'm going to have to pick that card up, right? Or if I didn't and I skipped over it and somebody pointed out, I would check it out. And I, since I started buying, I understood that I had to kind of separate my emotions for what's in the binder and my feelings on individual what have yous from what's happening in front of me with the person. So I'll buy that Workhorse happily, and that will be part of that transaction, but I'll turn around and bring that card back to our sorter, and just that's where I'll dump that emotion.
Yeah.
And there are people that don't and it works, and there are people that don't and it doesn't. And that's also fairly important too, is to, as a vendor, remind yourself, or somebody who's working with a vendor, that they should remain agnostic based on that. Essentially what you're saying, and understanding that a card has value because there are people playing it, and you can't just shit on somebody's favorite theme because you think it's too casual. Yeah. Yes, but with people you know.
Oh, I'm worse with people I know. Sorry, everyone I know. But yeah, I think that is important, and especially, as spoiler season has evolved. I mean, for those of you that were around, Rankered Elf back in the days of MTG Salvation, spoilers was huge. And speculating on spoiler season back then was night and day to what it is now. I mean, now, weeks ahead of time, we have whole set. Great. I have perfect information on what's in this set, and I don't have to guess anymore.
Yeah, and there's a better aggregate tool as well with Mythic Spoiler now, instead of having to wait for somebody to kind of coalesce all the various data points and individual websites things were going up on.
It's definitely much, much better.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important that as that changes, we change our assumptions, which kind of touches on my point, how I've changed things supply-wise. So for me, for spoiler season, what I'm doing now, knowing there are supply issues, is I've identified my 5 or 6 cards out of Core 21, one of which was a pick last week, and Jumpstart. So I'm like, okay, I know there's going to be supply issues. These are the things that I think are the most surefire, can't miss hits. And rather than go a little bit wider, I'm basically just targeting those few cards and going much deeper than I typically would. Because when supply's an issue, I might not be able to get such a wide net. But if I go after 1 or 2 cards, I can probably go pretty deep comparatively, especially in a local market where, right now stores might not be spending as much money on picking stuff up because they're just opening up and they've got to get their feet back under them, basically.
Yeah.
Reality of the LGS life is that you're pretty hand-to-mouth most of the time. So collection buys may not be something you can dump $20,000 a week on like you could if you're a GP vendor. The other note there is supply-wise, speaking of GP vendors, there's no GPs. So people that may have just stockpiled cards and gone to a GP and dumped to a vendor are probably selling them on TCG Player or Facebook now.
Yep.
And that means more competition in a single marketplace, which means cheaper prices. So because of that, I've shifted to a more deep than wide model, which typically in spoiler season I didn't do. I went a little bit wider because I wasn't quite as sure, because there's all the information out there from your EDH people and from vendors and pros and everything, but there are millions of casual players out there that don't have that voice. So I might be a little bit less sure, but now, like I said last week, Grim Tutor, not a chance it fails. That card's insane. I will absolutely pick up as many as I can for $30 or less.
Yep. There's definitely a card from M21 that I'm going to go pretty tall on when I get around to it. We're in that point in time where people are just speculating on price and racing to what they think market will bear. So it's taking my time. It's a point I want to go back and touch on, and I'll mention the card there in particular. But it's interesting that you mentioned it's the first time you'll go tall rather than wide. I think this is going to be one of the first sets in maybe 5 or 6 years where I will actually order multiple playsets of a single rare or mythic compared to picking up commons and uncommons, which I had before. Wilderness Wreck was the last card I remember going super deep on at release.
And I think it's a sign that, the rares are more often slam dunks than the commons and uncommons.
Yeah.
Because you can tell a rare's power level right away. You can tell Unbound Flourishing from set release is like, well, this is just doubling Season Light. Why would this card not hit?
Yeah.
You may not see that the talismans are a great pick because of how the Mirrodin talismans are, but you'll see that Unbound Flourishing. And it's with that lack of certainty here raised a little bit higher. Mm-hmm. It definitely makes sense that you see people going more for the rares than the commons and uncommons now.
No, I agree. I think the last thing that I changed, probably going into somewhere around Ikoria, and it was just easy to do and will remain moving forward, is I have the time and the ability to actually pay like 80% attention to podcasts while working from home. So I've changed what I listen to from just LR and the EDH Recast, and I've opened up to Bash Bros, MTG Grindcast, and Allied Strategies, all of which have either Mythic Championship level players or high profile Star City players behind them.
Yeah.
And for all of spoiler season, they've been, I think almost every episode has discussed, because it's been so protracted, almost every episode has had something spoiler related in it, but it links back to both that a pillar of pros and format specialists. One of the things, the point I wanted to touch back on, the reason I picked out format specialists is because they also do the additional legwork on older formats. So looking at a card like Fatal Push from the perspective of somebody who plays older formats, I could tell that was a good card. I needed to get in on it, obvious. Looking at the card Goblin Snoop from M21, the card that I will be going tall on, I knew it was good because I play Goblins, and I understand how Goblin Recruiter works and how Food Chain Goblins as an old school vintage deck work, that card had the possibility to be broken. I did not know how. It took between me seeing that card the release day and like 10 minutes later to get from a format specialist. On turn 2 you play Goblin Snoop. On turn 3 you play a card that I think we talked about buying into a long time ago, Bogart Harbinger. That tutors a goblin to the top of your library. You put a Kiki Jiki on top of your library. Goblin Snoop now has the activated ability of Kiki Jiki, so you just tap Goblin Snoop to make infinite Goblin Snoops. And the last copy of Goblin Snoop activates to copy Harbinger. Harbinger then puts either Mog Fanatic, which can sacrifice itself for 1 damage, or Slate Gang Commander on top, and you just get your opponent. Get your opponent from there. So this is turn 3 in Modern and Legacy.
Yeah.
And Vintage if you want. It's a little slow for Vintage, but the other thing I like is that this brought eyes to a lot of interesting cards, and now this can possibly bring back Goblins as a more played archetype in EDH, using any number of the either red, black, or Junt commanders that kind of fill the gap. So that was, like I said, setting up that pillar of format specialists got me where I needed to go with that card. Otherwise, I would have just been kind of dirtling for, I think it was maybe a day and a half before I saw it actually
pass through. Figure it out.
Yeah, before I saw it pass through Twitter.
Yeah.
So I checked the price on the card. It was way too high for what I thought it should be, and over time it's been declining. So, like I said, I'll wait and then move in, because I think this is going to be an EDH card over anything else. I don't think this props up a modern archetype. It is entirely creature-based, so it gets around Force of Negation, but a single path breaks his combo up on turn 3. And for Legacy, you can vial all this stuff in, which is great, but the deck just is more about accruing value over time and getting you in the mid to long game than it is going hyper-aggressive and getting you dead by 4. So I think purely EDH, but...
And I think it's interesting that Goblin Snoop was a card you went into before Jumpstart, and then Jumpstart released that 6-mana Goblin that's just better ringleader because
Yes.
it puts them all into play.
Yeah.
Which made Goblins even more viable at that point. So it's interesting to see that Goblins is getting this love all of a sudden from Wizards. So
Yeah, I'll bring that card up. Muxus, I think is how you pronounce his name, or its name rather. And yeah, anything with converted CMC 5 or less onto the battlefield.
yeah,
And that is essentially every decent Goblin that you would play.
Siege and Sling both. Those are the only ones that matter.
I mean, yeah, Kiki Jiki, and that's it. Yeah, that's the only reason I would set a vial past 4.
Yeah, past 1 or 2.
Yeah. So that was all done through through podcasts and format specialists, like that kind of information that those pods that I mentioned provide.
Yeah.
And I think it was either last week's episode or this week's Allied Strategies touched on Goblin Snoop.
Yeah. Tiny Bones has been kind of the thing that a lot of people have been harping on for a CEDH is, 2-mana, mono black, where can we find a home for it?
Yeah.
And that's, similar to Goblins. There's a ton of people that are trying to make this work in CEDH and regular EDH because Yargle was a valuable card for the memes. So I can't imagine that something like Tiny Bones isn't going to be valuable for a little bit for the memes.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
But it's, like you said, it's important to pay attention to those because you can catch things a little bit early.
Yeah.
And the more fluid this industry becomes, the more fluid MTG finance becomes, the more important those brief seconds you can get ahead of someone else are worth.
Yeah. So, if you were paying attention to those format specialists, you were actually able to get out of the Harbingers like that day for $15 a piece, and that was a card I think we bought in at quarters on.
Yeah, it was really good.
That was the initial flashpoint was that for speccing, not on Snoop itself or any projections. Yeah, but it plays to your point of when you adjust and you laser focus your spoiler season, you keep what you have to in mind in regards to supply chain in terms of relevance to sets like this, and then what's relevant to you as a financier. Like, you'll get where you need to go in time.
Yeah.
So, anything else you want to touch on? Or you want to go straight into picks?
Let's head to picks.
All right, cool. I'll go first this week.
Sure.
So, I chose the enchantment Vicious Shadows, which is...
I love this card so much.
I do too, and I just realized today that according to MTG stocks, it did not have a market value until after IMA.
Yep.
This card was just not moving at all. And from there, you can see that the average has just climbed over time. And eventually, market caught up. But this is a card that just has consistent demand. And it does this really interesting thing that I like. The first is that it effectively is hidden from everywhere. Nobody's playing this card in EDH, yet there is consistent demand for it over the last 3 years. Vicious Shadows, when I picked it last week, Card Kingdom was buying 15 at about $1.82 and change for credit. They are now buying more than that for more than that. Interestingly enough, the number of unique prices on TCG Player has been variable all weekend, plus or minus 2 from 95 total.
Yeah.
And the market price has gone up by about 7 to 10 cents, depending on the day you're looking. So, what does this card really do? Well, you discard... Sorry, whenever creatures put into graveyard from play, you may have Vicious Shadows, deal damage to target player equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. So you're effectively looking for some kind of sack outlet, or some kind of mono-red token generator that sacks something at end of turn. Think Kiki Jiki, like we just mentioned.
Yeah.
And you take a look at Rec, and you can see effectively, sure, there's a lot of value here. In terms of, like, Shattergang Brothers is on here, Parash is on here, but it's just super low population. So this card is either moving just straight to the invisibles behind the scenes, or this is just beginning to pick up and people aren't really beginning to notice. Now, I mentioned this is a sacrifice theme, not a Graveyard Matters theme. or a sack for value list, because you're just looking to kill your opponent with this. And it costs 7. It takes a while to get into play. So if this is just being sold to the invisibles that play at the kitchen table, it makes sense, because it's, like I said, it takes a long time to get there.
Yeah.
If you're playing at the kitchen table, you're most likely not that competitive, and just killing somebody in time with a 7 CMC enchantment, fairly palatable.
Sure. Yeah.
What I like about this card is actually what was just released for it, and that is Yixris, the Teamer General from Commander 20, and it plays into the Wheel of Fortune synergy, which is just whenever an opponent draws a card, except for the first one they draw each turn, you create a 1/1 green snake creature. Okay, so after you cast Wheel of Fortune, if you have any way to sacrifice any of the snakes you've just made from everybody at that table, you're now just going to dome people around the table and take them out. Obosh has been in the list as I've been scrolling up and down. Vicious Shadows costs 7. It will deal double because it deals the damage.
Yep.
So if not now, it will become a popular card in time as the strategy just kind of builds out and plays. You can do some weird things with looting effects and play like a Jeskai version of this, but I believe the strength is going to be in a Teamer style deck or a Jund style deck where you have a way to just make a ton of tokens, either with Yixris or something like Avenger of Zendikar, and then just have an easy out to sacrifice those tokens, be it Ashnod's Altar, Phyrexian Altar, anything for value.
I really like how well this combos with a prior pick of yours, Blasphemous Act, because it's not just good in your combo engine.
Yeah.
It's the type of thing that the invisibles, so to speak, love just because it's a red enchantment with too much text. And everyone knows how I feel about red enchantments with too much text. And I think it's great. I have played with this card in multiple decks. I am unashamed to say it. And this card's awesome.
Yeah.
I have never understood how it is as affordable as it is. It only has 1 printing. And the foils on TCG are the same price as the non-foils on Card Kingdom right now. So that's pretty telling.
Yeah.
As far as how visible this card is. Answer, not very. And I think that because of that, it's just a really solid all-around pickup.
Yeah.
It will pop eventually.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of when.
Yep, there might have been some trepidation around Commander releases, and so that's why if you look at the price graph, it might have plateaued into like Modern Horizons and stuff like that, UMA, because there's always the possibility, especially with UMA turning out to be like the graveyard set, so to speak. It might have been in there, and like I said, you can see that plateau happen. But until this gets a reprint, we have 3 years of price history to show that this card does nothing but go up, and the market is so high above the average right now, it's just ridiculous.
And we know what happens then.
Yes.
Price goes up.
All
right. I am going a little bit older here. Still EDH appeal for me. So I went for specifically the Mirage printing of an Enlightened Tutor. Which may seem a little bit odd because it is an infinite reprint risk. But if you take a look at the price history, specifically of the Mirage one, you can see that when the Eternal Masters reprint hit, low went from about $10 down to $6. And then what we've seen since then is the floor gradually rise to about $30. So this is the type of thing for me that, and even looking at average, when it hit, it went from a $14 average down to a $10 average. This card, due to its EDH playability, is fairly reprint proof. It's not, it hasn't quite reached that $100 price tag where Wizards is like, all right, we got to reprint this right now.
Yep. We
got to do something with it to control it. And I think that it's the type of thing that people often forget about because, yeah, it's like, $10, $20, but since about halfway through last year, it's been around 20 to 30. And has EDH playability, high visibility, decent reprint equity, sure, but we may be waiting a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we don't get it in Double Masters and we don't get it in Commander Masters, those are pretty much the only targets, is supplemental sets for this.
This is not going to be... Because they put Idyllic Tutor in Theros. We're not getting this ever in anything but supplemental.
Yeah, it's got to be an eternal only type of deal. Additionally, as we touched on, since supply chain is going to be kind of an issue with sets coming out as well as print quantities. Even if it does get reprinted in one of those sets, if you look at all the reprints, the floor rises every time.
Yes.
Worst case scenario, if we end up at a $20 floor on this card when it gets reprinted, as long as you're in for $20, which at about 66% is the going vendor rate, you're fine. You're not going to lose out on that. And I think a no-loss proposition is a pretty good spot to be in. And when you look at values of the other versions in terms of mid and market, I mean, you're looking at $40 to $50. So it's fairly reprint proof, absurdly playable, has some eternal play as well.
Yes.
The gush lists are making a comeback in vintage again. And we've got, obviously, Miracles and Enchantress that can run this card as a 1/2 of in Legacy.
It sometimes shows up in Shortcake, the red-white Painter's Over Grindstone deck.
That deck's great.
It is.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting, and I think it's a solid pick because supply has started to dry up again.
Yep.
You went from about a week ago when I checked, we were sitting at a Mirage supply. Let me pull up spreadsheet here. Yeah, about 130 listings, and we're down to about 50 right now. And I don't know if that's arbitrage because, as far as I can tell from what I've seen, we haven't had a whole lot of movement one way or another in terms of stock shifting on MKM, stock shifting on Haori or Dragon Star or anything like that. But it's liquid. It's moving like crazy on Facebook groups still. And we're not getting any more EMA. Judge promos, who knows? Those aren't exactly being flooded out into the market because European judges can't bring them to GPs to sell to American vendors. So we're sitting pretty steady here at about $30, $35 a piece.
Yep.
And as long as you can get in for, I'd be comfortable getting it at about 25 and below. Obviously, 20 or below is a little bit better, which is what I've been trying to get in at. I don't think there's a way that you lose money on it. I just think it's a really solid card that will always be liquid and will always be at least a $20 bill.
Absolutely. I think one of the important parts to remember, and is something that could be seen when I brought up this EDH rec page for this. This doesn't just go in white/X decks. This goes in mono white decks in EDH. And mono white is notoriously slow and bad. So being able to just tear through your library for something that you absolutely need, enchantment or artifact, is super important. And that's part of why the market always absorbs supply, and part of why it will always remain liquid. People love to play either prison-style decks, or you could even do some mono-white combo stuff with Heliod. You have to play this card to really get through. And the other thing is, in a lot of these mono-white decks, there aren't a lot of other cards that cost a lot for the deck, which makes spending $30-some, what is it? 35 right now on TCG is what I'm seeing for a light. 32 for a light play. That is a lot more palatable when you only have to buy one of those cards, as opposed to a number of them.
Yeah.
So it's not often that you come across something like that in EDH, but financially it does matter for something like this, and that's part of why it continues to be a very liquid card. So. And
it's something that, as a vendor, I'm never mad at seeing because I know how liquid it is, and I know I can give a good price on it. Like, you can honestly pay up to 75% on this if you really need it, and you won't lose money.
Yeah.
Because it is so liquid.
I'll tell you, as a vendor or, out in the world working for somebody or on my own, the only one of these three tutors that I dislike seeing and will never swing on is Mystical. The Vamp and Enlightened always. Mystical, it moves, but it also has a lot of different art, a lot of weird printings, and was forever a $6 card because it's essentially useless anywhere outside EDH.
Yeah.
So
and when it gets a reprint, like when Eternal Masters dropped, it'll drop back to $6 and then maybe get absorbed, hopefully.
Yeah. It was in the Jace spellbook, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah, it's $15, like, because it was whatever. It's the only one I dislike ever taking a swing on. or will pass on compared to the other two, because I know the other two will move.
Yep.
So I can get behind Enlightened Tutor, any number of copies in perpetuity. Just gobble them up as many as you can find. Mirage, the Judge promo, which is also the Mirage art, but foil.
Yeah.
6th edition set symbol. It's just a great card and a great example of what happens in a format like EDH for players that are starved for tutors, that need specific effects, that just rely on a card like this. Vamp Demonic, like, perfect examples of this. So.
Yeah. It's good.
Yep. But I think that's going to be it for this week, guys. You can catch us next week, where we will talk about whatever topic we post about in our Discord. Other than that, I am Halt. I am Reptar on the Twitter birds. You are
at Thirsty Sizzler.
We are at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter and Facebook and Patreon. We still have our YouTube channel kicking, so please toss us feedback there as you see fit. And then if you're listening,
don't need to like or sub, just tell us what you want to hear. That's what we really care about.
Exactly. I think we can also take feedback on Apple iTunes. I think that's still an option. And then Spotify, Stitcher.
Thanks, guys.
See you next week.